we take smell for granted. Like if I ask you, what are your surrounding smell, maybe you won't be able to articulate it just then, because you are so, you've taken those smells so for granted that literally when I interview you, maybe you will not be able to even discern them. But the person who's like not from that particular region, culture, or somebody who then enters your space would be able to, sort of look at it very differently. So this was a beginning research problem in a way, because we were trying to understand the history and cultural significance of a person, and because they were taking smell for granted, it was not really coming to the fore.
Hi everyone, welcome to Designdrives, where we explore why, how, and what design and designers are driving forward. The mission is to interview the most forward-thinking designers, innovative creators on the planet, to inspire and help you to reach your full creative potential and to make a positive impact in the world. In this episode, I chat with Kadambari Sahu on her learnings working as a design leader for many years. In recent times, she has been winning many global design awards and built up the design competence at ValueLabs in India. In the episode, we learn how she positioned and built up design from within the company and grows the responsibility and value within an organization. Further, we learn about smell design, as one of her most awarded projects is called Sniffing Out the Differences. We not only learn about the challenges and opportunities designing with smell, but also the business value of considering smell as a creative medium when it comes to your design output, or how to integrate it in a commercial setup. I hope you enjoy the episode. So I'm here with Kadambari Sahu, SVP of Design at ValueLabs. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Sebastian.
So we're going to talk about your experience working as a design leader now for many years. You also have been winning a lot of awards in recent years with a project called Sniffing the Difference, focusing on the experience that people make to their nose and how this influences the human experience and what kind of experience you can create from that. And it's quite stunning. And I'm looking forward to chat with you about that. Also about how you run teams in the context of innovation, how you manage teams, projects, and drive innovation forward with your background. So really looking forward to that. I think what would be really great, Kat, for the beginning is to set some context for the audience. So if you can outline a little bit of your journey, how did it all started out for you? That would be great.
So I'm Kadambari Sahu. I'm currently SVP Design at ValueLabs, and I founded User Experience Group 3 years back in ValueLabs. ValueLabs is a technology company. And 3 years back when I started this whole design consulting team, the aim was to create like a team which was world-class and, doing great work in UX, in service design, and, really crashing the boundaries between interaction design, service design, and, new media, bringing all those perspectives together, and creating, of course, world-class and good design for everyone. And now in 2021, we got Creative Agency of the Year by International Business Awards, and Muse ranks us as third in the top agencies in the world. So that's this just about what kind of team it is. It's a multidisciplinary team composing of people coming from various different perspectives and backgrounds and disciplines. So we have a multidisciplinary teams where designers come from interaction design, they come from visual design, they come from architecture, urban design, strategic design management, product design, then information design. So there's a lot of different sort of, design perspectives, discipline that comes together to create product and services, mainly in technology space, but using not just, technology, but looking at, how we can improve the life of people using service design, interaction design, and various different, disciplines that we come from. So it's like a holistic picture that we create, with using design as storytelling, design as, agent of change in the world. So that's like a little bit about my team. Currently, it is 50 plus team members that I have, mainly designers and some design managers. So that's about the team that we have in ValueLabs. I'm also founder of Design Inspire platform, which again comes from ValueLab. I'm the founder of that particular initiative, where we are looking to create just and equitable futures for all by using design education as a primary offering to create opportunities from people from everywhere, and especially from marginalized and underprivileged backgrounds. So that's one of the part that we're doing currently from ValueLabs. The another thing that you just touched upon is Sniffing Out the Differences. It's a collective currently where we are researching about smell interactions, how smell interfaces and olfactory interfaces can be leveraged to create stories, installations in interaction design, and how we can bring about changes with compelling stories and installation design using smell and even multi-sensory installations. So that's one part of it. And for my design leadership and design that I have done so far, I have received 140 plus awards, and yeah, most of them in last 3 years. That's some part of it. I'm also part of prestigious awards as a jury member, where I have done jury for Com Arts, then Vega Design Awards, TV, and many other. This year, I'm also co-chairing Interaction Awards 2022 to create just and equitable, awards for everybody, where we can talk about culture, design, and how design fits in everywhere, and the story of design triumphs around the world. With all that I'm doing currently, I think one of the things that I want to really have an impact about is creating just equitable futures and unlocking opportunities which are actually blocked because of some biases and myths. So to disabuse people of these kind of things, to actually let people do what they want to, with opening up new opportunities and empowering them through design and design leadership. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I do currently.
Well, thank you so much for the sort of impressive outline of your journey. This is, sounds super excited. I'm wondering which kind of area we go first, because I think there's a lot of ground to cover. But I think it would be, I think great to talk about sniffing the difference, because I think this was really a major project for you that got a lot of media attention and a lot of awards, like you mentioned. So I think it would be really great for audience if you can highlight a little bit what exactly Sniffing the Difference was, what you're trying to achieve with it, and what was the motivation behind it.
So in 2018, or even before that, I think 2017, I was looking at various different ways of how design impacts people. And one of the things, I have a heightened sense of smell. So I can smell things, and it matters to me a lot. And I was looking at, what to create, to create something which is really powerful and compelling. So I started my research in looking for olfactory interfaces and how that can, talk about cultural things. Thankfully, at that point of time, Prince Claus Fund and British Council had opened up grants for contemporary take beyond heritage. And that's what exactly fit in, the kind of stories that I wanted to talk about. Stories of change through smell. So Sniffing Out the Differences actually talked about 3 things. One was identity. Second thing was discrimination and differences that comes out when we try to identify us as somebody, and then, sort of discriminate if that comes into picture. So those kind of discrimination and politics of identity. And third thing was, of course, all of this storytelling through smell. The whole idea was to talk about powerful, stories, and sense of smell. When I was researching, and even as per my experience, was something which was very intimate, which is very emotionally driven, which is driven by your memory, and it has a long-lasting effect on you, because smell is one thing that actually enters your body, right? And then the stories that we created, exhibition that we created of Sniffing Out the Differences was on racism and massacre that had happened pre-independence, and we wanted to actually sort of use that story and talk about contemporary times where we were looking at a lot of polarization, and what can happen when these kind of polarization and things can affect us, how low humanity can stoop, and what kind of massacre can happen, how people go blind in these kind of things. We wanted to showcase that. So we used the power of smell and storytelling to create this massacre sort of space, which talked about these. And of course, all the smells were not pleasant in that, but it did talk about a lot of, sort of convincingly putting up the message together. I think most of the audiences were, emotionally moved with that. But apart from that, this massacre story, I think we had some really good ones where we positively talked about our identities being shaped up by all the places we live in, and not talking somebody else as a foreigner or somebody who's from outside the culture as totally not being from that city or from country. We also talked about war-torn region of Kashmir, and then a speculative design where it was challenging xenophobia. So all of this interesting story and everything with nose first.
So interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's totally right. Like, I think, very often if we go into a certain place or a certain space, we, smell something and then sort of it awakes memories, So memories from actually a complete different location, but somehow it connects, right? And I think every person in the audience probably has experienced that once in their life, that, smell kind of creates some kind of memory. To maybe a few years ago or some kind of experience. Maybe you can talk a little bit about like how it actually was then executed. I mean, I saw some images and videos how it was done. So it's basically, for the audience, please correct me if I'm wrong here, Kat, it was basically cones that were attached to the wall, and people can get closer to this cone, and then people can experience a certain smell. And basically that way you were able to tell a story, if I'm right. So basically, how did it work? Did you have to also add a text into that? How did you map out the experience so people actually could understand the story? Was it really just to smell and you didn't have to give any context, or you revealed it later? Or did you have to set some context in the beginning, or do some videos in between? Like how did you kind of execute that journey so people could follow that narrative? Because I'm not sure if it's just only smell without context, or if you need to add some other elements.
So what you talked about cone, that was just one installation out of the 5 installation that we had. And there were also another installation with jars. Now, when I deconstruct all of these, it's basically using a lot of design principles like gestalt and montage, like how 2 different images comes together. But this time, rather than 2 different images, it was about 2 different sort of senses coming together, or 2 different type of images coming together. So the one that you talked about, the cone, we use a lot of sensor technology with all of this. So there was like a sensor where, when you come towards the cone and you sort of just get in a certain range, it will detect a human presence, and then it will whiff out a small level of, perfume. So you can smell that. At the same point of time, we used a certain another sense or information to make sure there was a context. So I remember this thing, smell has a lot of associations. And for each one of us, it will have its own association. So it is important that in certain way you need to guide it. So in certain installations, where we like in the one that we're talking about, it's called identity stories. There we used like a sound, like a dialogues which used to come out where they narrated. There were 2 people. And it was sort of autobiographical in nature. So they talked about a certain cultural artifact, or they talked about a certain history of episode that happened in their life, and then there were smells. So it made like you were present in that particular region where from there which smell was, and the episode. So that way it created a sort of content made sense to them. Apart from that, the Jallianwala Bagh, the massacre and sort of installation, it had only sounds, as in like the journey starts with a festive occasion of Baisakhi and ends in massacre. So it had only the jars, like how you would have if you went on a historical site and unearthed some of the artifacts. So there were artifacts which were kept, and there were like some sound, like for example, sound of a baby. That was one of the most emotional ones, because what you could hear is the sound of a baby. What you could see is like a footwear with blood stains. And what you could smell is an extremely pungent smell. All of that thing talking about the aftermath of massacre where people were dead. So these kind of different sort of, information, which would make sense when seen in one go, was some of the ways in which we used, how to narrate a story. That's how the progression of the story happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's basically almost, it's really like an experience. You really experience the story and the narrative to a different level than, of course, than reading a book or watching a movie. And Yeah, so I think this is super interesting that you had to look into what kind of other interaction elements or senses do you have to add to the smell in order to, make the smell shine, or basically allow people to kind of understand the narrative only with smell. So interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the design process? So, how did it work out? I mean, you had to, for example, experiment, I think, a little bit. So maybe you just tried out with smell in the beginning, and then you understood maybe it's not enough context for people, so you needed to add other add other senses, or when it just came to picking the right stories and sort of mapping out the journey for people. How did that design process work out?
So it was amalgamation of 4 or 5 actually different sort of stories, right? One was massacred, one was of autobiographical cultural narrative of people, of commons, basically. So each required a very different sort of process. Talking about identity stories, we take smell for granted. Like if I ask you, what are your surroundings smell, maybe you won't be able to articulate it just then, because you are so, you've taken those smells so for granted that literally when I interview you, maybe you will not be able to even discern them.
Mhm.
But the person who's like not from that particular region, culture, or somebody who then enters your space would be able to, sort of look at it very differently. So this was a beginning research problem in a way, because we were trying to understand the history and cultural significance of a person, and because they were taking smell for granted, it was not really coming to the fore. So we had to actually go to that place, understand the significance. So first we look at the site, then we actually interviewed again and again, and finally that memory and how that memory is attached to a certain smell was sort of came to the fore. But it took a lot of time to actually interview those people on whom we were making these sort of installations. So first that happened. So picking up the smell itself is a difficult thing. Now the smell that you have experienced, to recreate that kind of smell, it was not so easy task. At some point of time, we could understand some of the smell we took from that particular region, then gave it to perfume makers. They actually made those perfume, and then we had to actually go back and validate whether it was actually smelling the same. So this was also about the smell manufacture and things like that. So this is just the part of first faithfully representing a person's experience, but there was another total different part where audience need to understand. So then we had to try and test whether only smell was working. So there are different installation, and each one of them tries to portray smell in a very different way. One is like in a jar where you are interacting with the jar, and then with the sort of a little bit of story elements inside that you're able to pick up. Second one with the narrative, then you are trying to sort of give. So it's a sound. One is a dialogue with a perfume. Another is like smells, and one is with sort of artifacts. The third is with poetry, and fourth is like totally with a video. So we had to try and test again and again to see which sort of way of storytelling was able to sort of describe the story well, in which ways. So it went on to different sketching, creating prototype, testing it out, and if it is failing fast in a way, trying out different ways to make sure that story is still getting to the audience without making it too dumbed down. So we didn't want it to make it like a straight, where you're just reading it out. It is something that intellectually you will make a connection to, because a lot of things were alluded, because we were also working with a subject which is extremely sensitive: racism, stereotypes, xenophobia, war-torn regions. These are not very pleasant stories, So yeah. So these kind of things we had to like put into place where we are just alluding, and intellectually you make the leap to join all those narratives together.
So interesting. And then how did it work out? Did you had a workshop, basically space where you tried it out, or how did it where all of you meet and experimented? Probably assume that if you have multiple smells in the same room, it could mix up a little bit, depending on how strong it is. I don't know, how did that work out?
Oh my God, it's a working with smell is very difficult. I remember for the first time when I had to actually choose like how do we go about perfume. I had come back, and the traditional. So we had used traditional perfume making in our installations. So those are without alcohol. and they're extremely intense. It's called attar, which is like, really very concentrated. So I used, and the actual method is they will put it in your hand and you're supposed to smell it. The whole arm used to get like filled with different kind of perfumes. And as I said, we are looking at perfumes which are for massacre. So it was like really very, very, very at times like disturbing. And at times I used to have headache. So that also was one of the part. Also making sure that it's not mixing. Because in the same installation, you are starting with a festival, ending with a massacre. The smells of festival is very different, full of, fragrance with, nice food and things like that. So we had to deal with a lot of different things. How to separate out these kind of smells from each other. Also making sure that, because once the room is filled with that kind of perfume, you cannot take it out. So these were some of the very tactical, sort of very pragmatic things that we had to deal with when we were designing. Thankfully, it was pre-pandemic times, so we could all meet. We could literally see how it is responding to each other, and we had like a space. A friend's house was converted into a workshop. We used to all meet there and used to create everything together. So yeah. It was a lot of work, but yeah, we did it like teamwork is always great, right? You always love to work in teams, and then each one of you have a very different perspective. The other thing was not creating stereotypes out of the perfumes. So that was like something we had to really question ourselves about, whether we are stereotyping it or it's proper to deal it in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
that makes sense. So yeah, a lot of experiments. And then it totally makes sense that you had this sensor that actually was just setting a certain amount of smell in that right moment. Otherwise, if you would constantly do it, the room would then start to be a mix of different ones, and just the strongest would survive. Probably a lot more about smelling than me, but from what I know and learned about the sense of smelling is that it's in the human brain also a type of sense that we use to understand if we need to be warned about something. So that means like if you go somewhere and you smell something, you're not gonna smell it forever. Basically, you smell it in the beginning, you smell it for a certain time, as long as your brain is basically trying to understand if this is, if we need to be conscious about something. It tries to protect us basically through the sense of smell. It tries to see if there is any danger around us, if this is like, or just tries to get information from the smell. But you probably have experienced yourself if you in a certain space that was not so pleasurable when you went there for a few minutes or even an hour, you will not smell it that strong anymore. And then you have someone else coming in the room and they say like, woof, that doesn't smell nice here. And and you don't even smell it anymore because you've been in that space for a long time. So it's a temporary experience, right? So, and like I think one way to kind of keep that ongoing experience is by having always new senses, because the brain then needs to reinterpret what exactly it is. Maybe more in terms of like how we kind of evolve from a sort of like a reason of warning and a reason of sort of discovery, but it kind of makes you experience it. Is that kind of aligning with what you learned about it?
Yeah. So it's called nose blindness. And when I was looking at a lot of literature about smell and how to create with them, and first of all, there's like a lot of like very small amount of information that you will find actually in terms of installations. There are, but there's very dearth of literature that you'll find. In one of the literature which only talked about smell as a sense, it talked about that you can register a new smell only for 120 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
120 milliseconds is all you get to smell something, and after that your nose becomes blind. Yeah. So I'm sure it must be like different for different people, not that objective, but yeah, that was taken into the account when we're looking at things. Also, what if you take like a stronger smell first and the weaker and the faint smells later, it is a problem, because you won't be able to literally smell that weaker sort of smells. So in a way, even for designing this exhibition, we had to make sure that we are not overpowering people with a certain sense of smell. So we had to keep like some of those in a way where you could smell that, you have like a break, and the ones which are having a faint smell are actually put first, then the ones which have like a stronger sense of the stronger smell. So a lot of thought process had to go to literally create a space, because it was like a one big space in a way, which we had to sort of break it down into 5 stories and keep it for the audience to freely move around. So Sniffing Out the Differences took into account a lot of things with sensory perceptions, with the exhibition design, interaction design, information design, if we can say. It all came down together to make sure that the sense of smell is not overpowered. Also, we read about coffee beans being something that you can use to refresh your sense, and then there was a lot of other literature which some of the experts would say it's a sham. There's nothing like you sniff a coffee and then you can look at it differently. So experimenting a lot of things like that, but you're correct about this evolutionary trait that we have picked up of only sort of understanding what is different from a warning perspective, from understanding what is not yours or which is a different environment. And that's why I was talking about that research becomes all the more difficult when you're trying to understand somebody else's experience of smell of their culture, because it's so difficult for them. They have already taken it for granted. So for them, for that smell sort of memory to come to their fore, to their conscious recollection, it takes a lot of time. You have to look at it from how would you question them that it comes and it becomes the part of their conscious answers and experience and things like that. So the smell that way is very tricky in terms of creating something from it. Your subjects wouldn't know until if they are already used to it, in one sense in the research part, and from the audience perspective, you need to make sure that you're not overpowering their sense of smell, that they stop actually registering anything. Also, there's another thing which is smell interactions. Some people have sneezes and things like that, so making sure that it is safe for them. So those also are different concerns that we need to address before we design anything.
Like usually your user when you design some kind of experience. In this case, your user, but they can be very different in terms where they are. I assume there's also a little bit of a cultural difference depending on which kind of audience you have. So interesting. Impressed and excited about the complexity of that matter. So I mean, there are certainly some commercial examples as well where smell was used, but it's not so much on the forefront. I think if you look at what designers are doing a profile, it's usually around the visual experience, right? That's where we focus most on. Sometimes we focus on the audio experience. This is coming more and more, but we don't focus so much on the smell experience. Not so much, at least in a commercial setup. It's not so much part of the discussion if we're designing product and service interactions. It's also due to technology, I think. But do you see any kind of change there, or what would be? Do you have any kind of recommendations to designers when it comes to that, about maybe the opportunities for using smell, or any kind of ideas how this could potentially be executed in a more commercial setup?
Sure. So first, I want to answer why we are focusing more on vision or audio. It goes back to actually philosophical. It's a philosophy, and if we want to change that, it's a philosophical change that has to happen. So when I was doing smell research, right, and looking at why it is that smell interaction or smell based things did not come out as much as we are looking at vision and audio. So many Western thinkers, including I think Immanuel Kant and many other, really very intelligent people, had identified smell as a bestial sort of sense, which is not as what you call wise or something that will take humanity forward. For them, the senses which would take us forward were vision and audio, because these are primary senses with which you would be doing a lot of sort of knowledge was transferred through these, like reading, writing, so you'll require your vision. Audio, because in these, like in the earlier days when, you could not write, it was transferred through your medium of, voice, in a way, audio, right? But they thought that sense of smell is the bestial ones, and so is taste. Mm-hmm. The only difference that I saw was some of the text from India, actually, where we were looking at it from the perspective of divinity. We're looking at, how you can achieve divinity. And that's why, in Eastern cultures, you'll find a lot of incense and things like that related to it. And it is considered something which is formless, but more real than anything else. So I think, if we want to take advantage of different sort of media, first, we need to change our perception towards it. So we need to understand that the knowledge cannot only be transferred through vision and audio, but it has a larger, our experience could be enhanced even through sense of smell or taste and things like that. And those are knowledge too. Once we make this shift in terms of, how we look at the world, I think interfaces will also change. And what can change potentially is a very different way of experiencing knowledge. And also, it will be accessible because there are people with different abilities, right? So we would be creating a more accessible, way of interacting with knowledge. And some knowledge is actually, sort of in a way, encapsulated in smell. What about those? How are we going to use them if we are not even accessing those kind of systems, right? So as I say, it's a change in the perception and way we look at things. It's a philosophical change that needs to be driven to make smell as a part of a mainstream design process, or how are we looking at it? In some part of it, it is already it's there for some things, like for example, brands, right? We all know that there's a memory and emotional connect when we look at and we identify people. So, for example, people identify their partners, their babies, and things like that. There's something about smell which is very intimate, right? Mm-hmm. Which brands have started using. In many of the retail spaces, you will see, where you could see these kind of things. When you enter, you already find it familiar and enjoyable. So you might shop more. Also, it's a great way of recollecting a brand with its smell. And this is already there. It's nothing new. It's already there. We just don't know it. So we are being actually trained to understand what is familiar with smell without us knowing it. In many of the industry, it is already there. Now, but what can we do more? Like coming to our experience design, right? Looking at the user experience. You talked about warning sort of situation. Some years back, I think I was looking one of the examples in TV where a car, when it speeds from a certain level, what would happen is the driver doesn't have to even look at the dial, that where the speed is. But with that speed, a certain amount of, sort of a perfume, a scent is given out, like a lavender. So what would happen is, A, you will identify that you're speeding. B, lavender having, the properties of calming people down, it would give that. You could also punish them if, speed is something like that. So all those kind of things can be, sort of be made available with smell. So that's what I'm saying. It's more of a shift to create a different path of knowledge and different path of access to information and interactions. When that happens, we would definitely be able to use it commercially. And as I said, already in the space of product design, when we are looking at product as a material product, people and brands are using it.
Super interesting what you touch on. Specifically about, if it comes to designing spaces, really then there's an opportunity for the smell sense to shine, and it could create a certain memory, like you said, for example, even with a brand. I remember this at certain hotels when I was there and went inside, and they put a lot of effort on creating a certain smell. I didn't smell it anymore when I was past the entrance, after a while, but every time I re-entered, I was smelling it for the beginning. And that way I really remember a positive smelling experience to this hotel experience. So and I connected to the brand. So interesting.
Yeah, think about getting a letter from these particular hotel, and then just that particular envelope smelling the same thing. It will take you back to that particular thing, right? I mean, exactly. People have been using it for love letters, but yeah.
I mean, such an exciting project, and we're gonna put the link for the audience into the episode description so people can check out the project and look themselves. It's super interesting. And so talking maybe a little bit more about also your role at ValueLabs when it comes to design leadership. You have been mentioning in the beginning a couple of things that you guys are focusing on. And you also mentioned topics that some people may not have so much touch points with. For example, like media is also part of what you're doing. It seems like a lot of different topics. How did you split the team between is it like you have project teams or you have sort of more disciplinary teams? Like how did you divide and sort of like organize and split the team?
So, to answer that question first, I would like to talk about my own experience as a designer coming from new media design to transitioning into something like something like UX, right? Mm-hmm. I fit in naturally because I was coming from a digital branch. But what was happening is that there are different perspectives which are there and different kind of designers which are there. So I wanted to create a team which was extremely inclusive, but at the same point of time, which has a lot of different perspective, because I believe only when you have diversity of thought processes, a different sort of pattern, a unique, innovative patterns can be created. So what I did is I got designers from various different backgrounds, and I divided them into what they would like to pursue. Like, for example, if their ability to think about research methodologies and creating interaction design was better than their visual, graphic design. We had interaction design team, which was comprising of a lot of different kind of designers, which had understanding of UX processes, which we were imparting. Once they joined, we, sort of have a process in terms of UX, like what kind of design process would be followed. But what we really cherished was their individuality and what they want to be. So I didn't want to create a cookie cutter sort of design job description where you have to be only this kind of designer to get into the role. And my own experience of design, in a way which I was very irritated when I joined the industry, was a full stack designer, in a way that they would call it in a very technological terms, somebody who could do the user research to HTML. And I was not that kind of designer. I had a strength in research and interaction design, so much not that in graphic design. I, of course, being a designer, you always have knowledge of color, typography, and things like that. But that was not somewhere that I wanted to be. So I wanted to make space for people like me who do not, fit into this cookie cutter sort of, one size fits all from research to HTML, everybody. So that's what we did. We are looking at designers who have, first of all, depth of thought processes and, creating more spaces for them. So they either find themselves as interaction designer or they find themselves as visual designers. If they are in between, then we, look at them as a product designer who wants to do something like starting with interaction design to a visual design, but then they don't look at HTML and all that spaces. So each one towards their own is something which is like a mantra for the design team, with diversity of disciplines that we really enjoy. And the team setup is basically more like an agency. It's a central team which serves the larger ValueLabs in various different projects that comes in. So we sit centrally, and that's how a lot of collaboration happens. And that's why, most of the projects have been able to, create something which is very different and unique. And, that's why we were able to get that sort of position as the creative agency of the year. And why was that? Because once a project comes in, maybe only two designers would be involved in that. Let's say an interaction designer and a UI designer. So they form the smallest unit of any sort of project. So when these two individuals are on that particular, project, and when kickoff happens and they get the brief, we don't just let these two designers work. What they do is they get that kind of brief, and as a team, we brainstorm. So what's happening is actually we are tapping into collective intelligence of the whole group, while these two team members are empowered to take, what they want from that team and drive forward. Apart from that, as I said, there's a lot of diversity of disciplines, right? So even within the visual design umbrella, we have people who are animators, who are illustrators. So these kind of different sort of animator, illustrator, UI designer, graphic designer, So these different nuances helps us to create something which is very unique, even when we are looking at just, let's say, UI design. So these disciplines then add onto that to create a very different kind of experience. So this diversity is actually helping us to push forward our, thought processes. And because one thing, whenever one idea strikes, we successfully implement it, that becomes the benchmark. That time we have that as already known, tried and tested methodology. And if it fits the context, we know this is what we can do at the least. But then we push beyond that. We look at it that, okay, we have reached here. How can we make it more intuitive or more experiential? So that those are the questions we are tackling. So that way, the whole team is extremely motivated to find every time something new, discover something new, and we know that collectively only this is possible. So these designs that way are so collaborative, as I like to put it, that one person could have not done alone. It could have not been done if one person passed the whole design to other. But it only happened because of the conversation between these two people. Certain knowledge and experiences were passed. And because of that, a pattern which is so unique, which either of them individually could not have obtained, is something that coming into table. So that's what we are tapping into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's great that you touched on some very important topics, like, empowering people in the team to kind of take responsibility. And I think also the topic of, full stack designer, like you mentioned, I know very, very few designers who can actually go from research to HTML on a high level. I think every designer needs to understand that process, though, because if you are too hyper specialized, you're just going to be less valuable to the team. And if you can just take a project forward for like 1 week because you just specialize on this one little piece of the design process, then it's going to be difficult to kind of incorporate that person into the team. But like, I think not having that sort of like point where a person is really good at it, but then like growing from there, I think is good. And getting understand about the full design process, but certainly doesn't need to execute from like research to HTML. I think
they often call it T-shaped designer, right? Where
exactly.
the essential part of the design process, yes, but you take one particular field and you dive deep into it. So yes, that's like the magic mantra for different teams with different kind of T's coming together to create something unique.
I mean, if a designer wants to be good at the whole process, they're usually very senior. So they've been doing it for a long time, and they've been actually getting the opportunity or creating the opportunity for themselves to actually go from projects and a lot of time in research and UX and also UI and kind of gain it. But that takes a lot of time. Yeah, I assume you probably need to, if you have these different skill sets, these unique skill sets, if you want to cherish the individuality, you need I think the sort of resource management or like design management becomes also important because you work with other clients, right? So you, let's say you have someone that is maybe like you cannot just put people randomly together. So if you have someone that is sort of really good at illustration, but it doesn't make sense for the client to have an interface that is more on the edge of illustrations because he wants to have something more, let's say, graphical. You would need to arrange the team like differently, right? So I think you constantly need to see like, okay, what's the best composition here for that particular client? So that I assume is also some definitely, I think some kind of work that needs to be done and kind of moderating that whole conversation. Maybe you need to even change some things like during the process as you kind of learn more about the client problem, right?
Yeah. That's what happens actually. We have like the whole design operations and management team, which looks after that. You rightly pointed. Every time it's a very different sort of setup that you have to do for a particular client. But what's a win-win situation here is you would align somebody like as I said, the basic unit would be always interaction designer and a visual designer, mostly a UI designer, which is there. And there are certain specialists like animators, illustrators, even user researchers, accessibility experts, information designers, all those kind of sort of things we have in the team. While they are there, they are assisting them in a capacity where it is making sure that the project is set up for success. So always making sure that the right alignment is there requires a certain amount of understanding and appreciating those individuality. Rather than looking at it as a limiting factor, we need to make sure that you are utilizing those kind of skill set in a way that it will bring up successfully, sort of get there. As you rightly pointed out, it's every time we have to sort of create a team, a sort of a small team, spin it up for like a client to make sure it is aligning very well.
And what's interesting also is that, if I understood correctly, you were starting design within the company. So basically it was a sort of a new capacity, and the team has been growing a little bit, or a lot actually. And so I'm wondering a little bit, how did you position design within the company? Was there from the very beginning the correct understanding what is the role of design? Were you able to kind of expand on that? Like, how do you position design, try to position design at the company, trying to be a force of support for other stakeholders, and maybe even growing the role of design within the company? How did that work out for you?
Sure. So like when I joined ValueLab, UX design was not there. And design was actually one of the functions that they have, but it was catering more to like, let's say HR, creating banners, posters. It was
Brand
more
design.
like a marketing sort of a setup where you have a designers who are working in house for like a very small bits and pieces of work. Like, for example, they would always call beautification of PPT, presentation PowerPoints. So those kind of things were there. And that's why it was extremely important for me to make sure that they don't carry forward the same sort of knowledge to this new team which was getting created. And the mandate for this team was to create a design consulting arm, which would never be inward looking in a like setup where you're creating a PowerPoint presentation for somebody, but something which was more on design consulting, where you have user experience, you have research. So first of all, I differentiated the whole two thing because it was called design studio. I called it user experience group. And I said, that's not design. Beautifying your PPT is not design. So let's first start with what design can do. Luckily, at that point of time, when we just started with the user experience group or design team, actually in ValueLabs, they had asked me first to look at the website of ValueLabs, which at that point of time was doing really bad. It was not intuitive. It was like, it had a lot of its problems of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me if I could change the, website for them. At that point of time, I asked them that, okay, why do you want to change it? Like, apart from it doing really bad, why do you want to change? What value do you want to bring in? So they wanted to make, more business, grow organically, and all those kind of questions were there. More so, when I went into the research, I understood the problem was not just website, it was the whole of the branding which has gone for a toss. It was a company which was founded 21 years ago in Hyderabad with just 3 people. And that branding, was continuing even now when it is a multinational company, which is employing 6,000 people. At that point of time, it was employing 5,000 people. So I said, it's wrong. So initially, we faced a lot of resistance to this. In fact, the whole project was abandoned in between. But then, I pushed forward. And finally, with this particular one project doing success and marketing also tracking the metrics, some of the metrics actually were like increased 400%, the about page view and things like that. So those directly was like, numbers that you could see, but also how the design made everybody feel around them. So I remember when the project abandoned, it got abandoned because our CEO said that we don't want to change our logo. Of course, it was like a lot of emotional connect, right?
Yeah.
When you start a company with 3 people and, it's a small setup and that logo has stuck with people for 21 years, the kind of perception it has is a lot. So I had to literally, work on literally looked at psychology biases, had to take that out, then had to like really inform the whole management, CEO, everybody. Thankfully, people are really smart at ValueLabs. When I say something, they actually want to hear. At least they want to listen. Even if they want to object to it, they are okay to listen, even things that does not make direct sense to them. So CEO agreed to listen to me. Then I showed him like a lot of biases that are actually dictating his, sort of his and other management, decisions at that point of time. And funnily, when the whole project was finished, and I was like, okay, this is the new website and logo. Do you want to see the last one? So he said, no, please don't turn that out. It hurts my eye. The same person. But these are still on the visual design, right? But actually the branding did a lot of other things. It articulated the values that ValueLabs was living much more. It actually just gave it, as you call, identity. Why it is called identity? Because it speaks volume. So that was understood by just ValueLabs. For our clients, we made sure that, and with that exercise, right? Because we were not directly jumping into the craft of design. We had done like a good amount of workshops where we interviewed everybody, created some sort of justification. Each thing had a sort of narrative and story behind it, so they understood that how strategy was driving everything. And of course, everybody loved it, the project. That became the first. So once you prove the value, people understand. And that was just the beginning. That was like the first few days of the team. From there on, every other interaction, we made sure that articulation is as important. We made sure that we are making partnerships and not silos. Because one of the biggest problem with us designers are that we understand design, and unfortunately or fortunately, UX design now being the hot topic, everybody wants to give you suggestions. So how not get irritated, but understand that why people are showcasing so much of interest is because our discipline matters, and take it constructively and educate. Take that opportunity to educate people about not being a pretty picture, but how it is driving strategy is important. And that's what we did with all of our clients. In starting, the timelines were really like 1/3 of what actual it could have been. But through a lot of explanation, by educating them, we sort of made sure that, and with them, strategizing that what value each of the design process will bring into their business was important. This is how we sort of molded the perception of people from a pretty picture, amazing aesthetics UI, to design being something which is actually driving the strategy. In fact, in our company, in ValueLabs, we have this digital flywheel. Earlier, it was just business strategy at the center, and it had experience and 4 corners which were there. But after all of these exercise, I think it got another layer. It was business strategy. It was powered by design. So what we were trying to say is that design is focusing your business strategy. And that is currently all across ValueLabs. So people now understand the value of design as people who can solve business problems. Now we don't get things like design website for us. Now we get, how do we get our business from this to this? How can we increase adoption? How can we do this? So now our statements have changed because we could bring about that change in the perception of people with whom we were, creating projects and stuff. So stakeholder education is extremely important. That only can bring up the design maturity, and then thereby you can make changes and change in organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're touching on so many interesting topics. I mean, first of all, I think the brand design and logo design product, that might be it's always a tough start. And I always think it's one of the most challenging one to kind of reposition like a brand, because like you said, there's a lot of emotional investment. Specifically, if you work with the people that have founded the company at the very beginning, they have a lot of emotional investment, and that process that requires a lot of facilitation, stakeholder management. And then one thing you mentioned is also important, like articulation of your design choices and using design as a strategic element, and being smart about like how you communicate design, that this is sort of like its own role. And I think that's so true. I think, as designers evolve in their role, I think, it's in the very beginning, it's about learning the hard skills. So understanding actually your craft, being it user research, being it visual design, whatever it is, right? You talked about T-shaped designer. But then very often, I think it was the next step of a designer is to be really good at communication and facilitation. Yeah. So really being good about like talking about why we need to do something, how we can provide value, and what was the reason for our offering that we're making here, or our recommendation, because I think that's sort of the difference between let's say a mid-level designer and a very experienced designer in a business context, that they're able to communicate this very well, because that way the other side understands the reasoning for it, and it needs open ears as well, like you said, like your CEO was open to hearing about that. That's obviously also, I think, needed. But yeah, it's so important. You were able to position design as a strategic element around business problems, right? Also, it's very interesting to hear how you were using the branding and the naming of sort of the group to kind of put people in the right mindset and kind of disconnect into what they kind of maybe associated so far with design. Super interesting story. So thank you so much, Kat, for sharing that. I would really love to continue chatting with you. There's so much more ground to cover, but I think we need to wrap it up because of time. So I would like to thank you so much, Kat, for taking the time and chatting with me today.
It was a pleasure, and thank you for having me here. Thank you, Sebastian.
All right, that was the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments or by tagging me in the post. What were the biggest learnings for you in the episode? I'm always super curious about that. If the episode provided you a lot of value, make sure to follow and subscribe and share it with friends or others so they also have the chance to learn and grow themselves. All right, until next time, cheers.